Section 2. Fall of the Western Roman Empire. If you were there, you are a former Roman soldier who was settled on lands in Gaul. In the last few months, groups of barbarians have been raiding local towns and burning farms. The commander of the local army garrison is an old friend, but he says he is short of loyal soldiers. Many troops have been called back to Rome. You don't know when the next raid will come. How will you defend your lands? Building background. Though the Roman Empire remained large and powerful, it faced serious threats from both outside and inside. Beyond the borders of the empire, many different groups of people were on the move. They threatened the peace in Rome's provinces and eventually attacked the heart of the empire itself. Problems threatened the empire. At its height, the Roman Empire included all the land around the Mediterranean Sea. The empire in the early hundreds stretched from Britain south to Egypt and from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Persian Gulf. But the empire did not stay that large for long. By the end of the hundreds, emperors had given up some of the land the Roman army had conquered. These emperors feared that the empire had become too large to defend or govern efficiently. As later rulers discovered, these emperors were right. Problems in the empire. Even as emperors were giving up territory, new threats to the empire were appearing. Tribes of Germanic warriors, whom the Romans called barbarians, attacked Rome's northern borders. At the same time, Persian armies invaded the east. The Romans defended themselves for 200 years, but only at great cost. The Romans struggled with problems within the empire as well. Because so many Romans were needed in the army, not enough people were left to farm. To grow enough food, the Romans invited Germanic farmers to grow crops on Roman lands. These farmers often came from the same tribes that threatened Rome's borders. Over time, whole German communities had moved into the empire. They chose their own leaders and largely ignored the emperors, which caused problems for the Romans. Other internal problems also threatened Rome's survival. Disease swept through the empire, killing many people. The government increased taxes to pay for the defense of the empire. Desperate, the Romans looked for a strong emperor to solve their problems. Division of the empire. The emperor the Romans were looking for was Diocletian, who took power in the late 200s. Convinced that the empire was too big for one person to rule, Diocletian divided the empire. He ruled the eastern half of the empire and named a co-emperor to rule the west. Not long after Diocletian left power, Emperor Constantine reunited the two halves of the Roman Empire for a short time. Constantine also moved the empire's capital to the east into what is now Turkey. He built a grand new capital city there. The new capital was called Constantinople, which means the city of Constantine. Although the empire was still called the Roman Empire, Rome was no longer the real seat of power. Power had moved to the east. Barbarians invade Rome. Not long after Constantine moved Rome's capital, German barbarians, people the Romans considered uncivilized, from the north began to raid the Roman Empire. As you have already read, barbarian tribes had settled along the empire's northern border in the 200s. For more than 100 years, these tribes mostly stayed out of Roman territory. Late in the 300s, though, the barbarians began raiding deep into the heart of the empire. Early invasions. The source of these raids was a new group of people who moved into Europe. Called the Huns, they were fierce warriors from Central Asia. As you can see on the map on the next page, the Huns invaded southeastern Europe. From there, they launched raids on nearby kingdoms. Among the victims of these raids were several groups of people called the Goths. The Goths could not defeat the Huns in battle. As the Huns continued to raid their territories, the Goths fled. Trapped between the Huns and Rome, they had nowhere to go but into Roman territory. Rome's leaders were afraid that the Goths would destroy Roman land and property. To stop this destruction, the emperors fought to keep the Goths out of Roman lands. In the east, the armies were largely successful. They forced the Goths to move farther west. As a result, however, the western armies were defeated by the Goths, who moved into Roman territory. The sack of Rome. The Romans fought desperately to keep the Goths away from Rome. They also paid the Goths not to attack them. For many years, this strategy worked. In 408, however, the Romans stopped making payments. This made the Goths furious. Despite the Romans' best efforts to defend their city, the Goths sacked or destroyed Rome in 410. The destruction of Rome absolutely devastated the Romans. No one had attacked their city in nearly 800 years. For the first time, many Romans began to feel afraid for the safety of their empire. The empire in chaos. Unfortunately for Rome, the city's fall to the Goths in 410 wasn't the end of the invasions. The Gothic victory served as an example for other barbarian groups to invade the western half of the empire. In the early 400s, the Vandals invaded Spain. Then they crossed into northern Africa and destroyed Roman settlements. As they passed through Roman areas, the Vandals destroyed nearly everything in their path. At about the same time, the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes invaded Britain, and the Franks invaded Gaul. By the 480s, a Frankish king named Clovis had built a huge kingdom in Gaul. Clovis, a Christian, was one of the most powerful of all the German kings. Meanwhile, the Huns, under a new leader named Attila, raided Roman territory in the east. Attila was a brilliant leader and a very scary enemy. Here is one description that shows why he was so terrifying. He was a man born into the world to shake the nations, the scourge of all lands, who in some way terrified all mankind by the dreadful rumors noised abroad concerning him. Attila led the Huns in raids against Constantinople, Greece, Gaul, and parts of northern Italy. But because he was told that diseases ran wild in southern Italy, he decided not to go south to Rome. The end of the Western Empire. Rome needed strong leaders to survive these constant attacks, but the emperors of the 400s were weak. As attacks on Rome's borders increased, military leaders took power away from the emperors. By the 450s, military leaders ruled Rome. Unfortunately for Rome, most of these military leaders were too busy fighting among themselves to protect the empire. Barbarian leaders took advantage of this situation and invaded Rome. In 476, a barbarian general overthrew the last emperor in Rome and named himself King of Italy. Many historians consider this event the end of the Western Roman Empire. Factors in Rome's fall. There were many causes for the decline of Rome, including barbarian invasions, corruption of governmental officials, inflation and a weakening economy, and the power of the military to make and remove emperors. One cause of Rome's decline was the vast size of the empire. In some ways, Rome had simply grown too big to govern. Communication among various parts of the empire was difficult, even in peaceful times. During times of conflict, it became even more difficult. Political crisis also contributed to the decline. By the 400s, corruption, the decay of people's values, had become widespread in Rome's government. corrupt officials used threats and bribery to achieve their goals, often ignoring the needs of Roman citizens. Because of officials like these, Rome's government was no longer as efficient as it had been in the past. In the face of this corruption, many wealthy citizens fled the city of Rome for their country estates. This action created a series of causes and effects that further weakened the empire. Outside Rome, many landowners used slaves or serfs to work on their lands. To protect their estates and their wealth, many landowners created their own armies. Ambitious landowners used these personal armies to overthrow emperors and take power for themselves. As wealthy citizens abandoned Rome and other cities, city life became more difficult for those who remained. Rome's population decreased and schools closed. At the same time, taxes and prices soared, leaving more and more Romans poor. By the end of the 400s, Rome was no longer the city it had once been. As it changed, the empire slowly collapsed around it. Summary and preview. By the early 500s, Rome no longer ruled Western Europe. But as you will read in the next section, the empire in the East continued to prosper for several hundred years.